Hey everybody, it's Lavender Town. And when I was young, my fantasy worlds were bland, flat, two-dimensional wastelands, and I did not know why. So in this series, I'm going to document how to flavor blast a fantasy world so it's rich and feels real and cool and stuff, and we're off to a crazy start. Now obviously we're talking about a fictional religion here. I'm not trying to start a YouTuber-based cult. That's not very cool. To get started here, we have to choose the values of the religion, basically just deciding what is forbidden, what is holy, what is encouraged. Most religions in the real world have things that are banned and traits that are encouraged or things that are considered holy. Common things that are banned are things like eating certain meats, antisocial crimes like theft and violence, and behaviors that damage the religion like heresy. Holy or encouraged behaviors like praying, wearing religious clothing, paying tithes, and altruistic or religion-promoting activities like charity and missionary work. For my story, I need to create a religion for a society that venerates warriors and hunters and encourages the exploration and domination over nature. It is also a society that does not help the poor. This is important for this story. So I will be weaving in a belief in prosperity gospel, which is the idea that people being well off or lucky is evidence of the favor of God, and that those who are poor or unfortunate are allowed to be so because of some moral failing. With all that in mind, the values that I will put at the center of this religion are warrior-type values: emotional stoicism, domination over enemies, civilizing and dominating the natural world, and acquiring honor, status, and heroic deeds. Based on these positive attributes, I think that the most unholy or terrible things in this religion would be seen as unproductive, cowardly, sickly, weak, passive, or wild and emotional. Nature is the enemy in this religion. In my story, an angel comes down and gives two explorers holy weapons, a sword and a bow, and this allows them to beat back the wilderness and form civilized society and allow humanity to rise to its rightful place above all natural things. I don't know if you can tell, but I use Manifest Destiny as another real-world inspiration for this belief system, and I do think that researching and referencing real beliefs can be really helpful when you're world building. Do keep in mind though that if your story is clearly referencing a real belief system, your story may be read as a critique or an endorsement of that source. His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman is a good example of this critical style, whereas Chronicles of Narnia is the opposite. It's more of an endorsement. Just make sure you know what you're saying so that when you write your story, you're not accidentally making commentary that you don't actually mean. I do feel like the way that fantasy stories sometimes deal with religion is kind of a cop-out. I have a pet peeve for, particularly isekais. The way that they deal with religion so often is just by making one particular, belief system canonically real and provable. So there will be a literal character who's like a god or goddess that maybe one of the characters is a devotee of, and it's fine, but I do feel like it makes the gods or goddesses feel more like they're just politicians that you can petition for favors. I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, and sometimes it kind of reminds me of Greek mythology, which is fun, where all the gods and goddesses have very human traits and very negative traits, and they're not super trustworthy, and you can pray to them all you want, but the gods might just curse you basically out of jealousy or randomness. That can be fun. But I just personally find it more interesting when it's a little bit more like the way that religion works in our real world, where, faith is a factor and there's different levels of belief and different levels of belief in how literal the texts are and that sort of thing. I think that that can create kind of a richer and more grounded feeling fantasy world, rather than having the gods standing there being hey, if you want my help, you have to pray to me. It's again, it just feels like politics in the fantasy world rather than religion. Many religions have simple symbols that can indicate holy places, clothing, and things like graves. Knowing that this religion and the society that it's going to help shape is so focused on monster hunting and exploration, I think a sharp, Kiki-like shape is best. I'm going to make two versions, one that is very simple so that it can be formed easily out of sticks or drawn by anyone, and one that is more ornate, more like jewelry. This is common in real life as well, of course. For this, I'm going to be using a perfectly square X shape. It's sharp and simple, and it also reminds me of X marks the spot, which is an explorer's symbol. It also looks a little like a simplified sword, and I'm putting these notches along it to represent the two explorers. And then I ended up, as I was kind of working on this and going through the graphic designer's mania, I started to notice that there's actually kind of two different shapes I can pull out of this. So one is obviously the sword, and I want it pointing backwards because this is also a religion that is all about like returning humanity to its rightful place. It's going backwards, or hearkening to tradition. So I wanted that element of it. I also wanted to make sure that we see the body of the angel and something representing the two explorers, because again, that's just tying it more and more into this core or heart story that I have developed. So I thought, there's a couple different ways I could do this. I ended up doing this pretty simple like dashed line on one arm of the X, both to indicate where the blade would be if we're looking at it as a sword. If we're not looking at it as a sword, we see the angel's head, and then her kind of wings are the crossband of the X, and then her body is down, and then we see the two explorers above her head. And then in a more ornate jewelry piece, we can actually have the sword be more explicit, but we still have these two little gems into the sword that represent the explorers. And then for like a simple grave marker, you would just tie a ribbon or some twine around one of the X segments to indicate the two explorers. These are all different ways that this symbol could be made. I also tried to show up off to the right side what I'm talking about with the angel and the explorers being represented, because I feel like I'm sounding crazy. Like it's very much giving the Pepsi document, but trying to imbue as much meaning and like symbolism into this that you can is important. You got to remember that while you're just working on it for a couple of hours, maybe tops, in the context of your fiction or your world that you're creating, it would be something that people have been sitting with their whole lives, and so I would definitely try to give it a little extra thought. So the next thing we need to talk about are the uniforms of the religious professionals, is what I'll call them. In some religions, it's a monk, it can be a priestess, it can be a shaman. There's all kinds of different religions that have different roles where people have a little bit more responsibility and power, and basically take a stronger hand in the way that the regular people are interfacing with this religion and religious buildings. So some questions you should ask yourself when you're developing your fantasy religion is who takes care of the place of worship and takes on leadership role in religious ceremonies? How can you tell their status as such a person? And what are their responsibilities and their privileges as having that role? So for my fantasy religion, I'm only making a male uniform because it is a warrior religion and it's really prioritizing kind of like strength and domination and masculinity in a way that I think would preclude it from having priestesses. I also wanted to make sure that the garment itself looked kind of tailored and very crisp and nice. The level to which different characters have money is going to be important, and knowing that the church has a lot of money in this community will be reflected in the clothing that the people who work at the church wear. I also wanted there to be a way that you can visually signify how high level somebody is. So at the highest level, basically they have these 3 diamonds up at their collar, and you get more or less diamonds depending on what level you are at. I also wanted this like detachable section. There's kind of like these long tails on the back. This would be a detachable element, and it would be hooked on with buttons. I'm also trying to think about what material everything is going to be made with. That is really important. The diamonds are made out of ivory, so I also wanted to show the symbol somewhere on this uniform, so I have placed it on the bottom of this sash area. And I think that the detachable nature of it is interesting because it kind of alludes to the idea that throughout this person's life, they might switch these out. So this is giving us some information about either their level or, you know, some part of their job, because it's something that while the base uniform would not change, perhaps this part would change when they get a promotion or something like that. The primarily black and white color palette I wanted to have as both a symbol of the rigid good versus evil logic that is built into this belief system, as well as it is something that I personally associate with more of like civilization, humanity, structure, stoicism, whereas like nature is this big explosion of like warmer colors like brown, and a lot of brighter colors. You know, the natural world is full of all kinds of different colors, so when I see something that is stripped down to just black and white, it feels like it's in opposition with nature, which as we know is a core idea in this belief system. Next, I want to think about some celebrations or holidays that might be a part of this society or belief system. Sometimes I think that when people are world building, especially like a medieval style or a past-based society, they make it a little too doom and gloom and forget that people were always trying to have a little bit of fun or a little bit of joy in their year. So many different ancient communities have like always had some kind of festival, some kind of celebration, a feast, something. So I think that thinking about this can be really helpful in enriching the world that you're building. So I have some story stuff that I want to put in here, but generally what you can think about is just like what special foods, like what are the holiday foods of the celebrations you're thinking of. I have this little stuffed like man-shaped bread, like it's a little human-shaped puffed baked good, and it would be filled, I think, with some kind of like minced meat or fruit, so kind of like a hand pie but in more of a gingerbread man shape. I also think these like root vegetables cut open would be nice. I would imagine that this holiday would be in the fall, nearing the winter. A lot of societies that you know, live in hard times do some sort of harvest celebration, you know, kind of like a last big feast before the hardship of winter really sets in. So that's definitely what I'm kind of leaning towards here. And then I drew two children in different traditional clothing. I wanted the boys' clothing to look a little bit like the outfits depicted in our origin story illustration. So this idea that the boys are dressing up like the explorers and then the girls are dressing in a different sort of way, based on a different character that I haven't really talked about or depicted in the illustration yet, but how adorable. I love the big long bunny ear jester hat kind of thing, and I gave her these little snow white puff sleeves. Again, I'm keeping the color palette a little bit, actually quite a bit brighter and more fun, obviously, than like the outfits of the clergy, but again, we're leaning more towards the crimson and burgundy that is depicted in our depiction of our explorers from the Heart story. And I spent some time rendering the little bread bun man, maybe a little too much time, but I really wanted the dough to look shiny and delicious, so yeah, we spent some time doing that. And then I just have a little color palette off to the side. Gold and red with a touch of green is what I had in mind for this fest or holiday. A lot of real world holidays have a color palette, so I just wanted to include that as well. Okay, so will all this information actually end up in my story? Probably not, but now that I know all this, I will know how to write this element of my world in an internally consistent way. I hope this helps you write your story and make your fantasy worlds a little bit richer. Let me know what you thought of all this, and if you got this far, please tell me a little bit about the stories you want to write. Thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much to my wonderful members and patrons, including Alice Exley, Neko Omori, Roger Baker, Trexa Panda, Zio Reyes, Lucian, Shaola Ninja, Lexi Ramos, Lonely Zealot, Novel Goblin, The Mousy Mouse, Spark of Curiosity, Rosie Valentine, Paul Savanat, Frog Scourge, Jessica Cook, Prince Piplup III, Celery Sticks, I'm a Potato, Honey Kitten, Nee Nico, Loro, Data, Lily McFarlane, Skitten, Gold Pikachu, Ace Wander, Jordan, QB, Jeffu, Songbird Galesworth, Sunshine, Whimsic, Hoodle Doodle, River de Goblin, Raz Taroche, Graveyard Moss, Grexius, Emmy Lightning, The Midwestern Menace, CB, Lucy Yamajiki, Live Live, Ravenscrow, Zocelot, Teal Music, Jabber Dabber Doo, Light Jewel, Kadaria, The Expressive Poker Face, Tsuvaki, Cutie Pie, Ice Cream Pal, Cola, JJ Jade, and of course, Live Live Blah.